Hi, awesome Algebra 1 students. My name is Ms. Vercellus, and I am going to teach you the very last day of factoring quadratics. So we already factored quadratics by just factoring out a greatest common factor. And then we factored quadratics for a couple days where there was no greatest common factor. Remember, we had to think of two numbers that multiplied to the last term and added to the middle term. So now we're going to put those two concepts together. We're going to first factor out a greatest common factor, and then we're going to factor the rest that doesn't have a greatest common factor. So there's going to be two steps to each of the problems today. We got this. I have three examples. So here's the first example. Factor 2x squared plus 8x minus 10. First, we need to factor out the GCF. Step one, write it down. And when I look at these three terms, 2x squared, 8x, negative 10, I know that the GCF, the greatest common factor, is 2. So I write the 2 outside of the parentheses, and then I divide each of these three terms by 2 and write what's remaining in the parentheses. So 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. 8x divided by 2, positive 4x. And negative 10 divided by 2, negative 5. So step 1 is done. I factored the GCF. Step 2, factor further. Now, what do I mean by that? Factor further. The 2 stays alone, right? That was from step 1. We factored out that GCF. But this quadratic, x squared plus 4x minus 5, we can factor further by using the methods that we learned when there was no greatest common factor. So we need two numbers that multiply to negative 5. And add to 4. I'm going to make my list of numbers that multiply to negative 5. So it'll be 1 and negative 5, negative 1 and positive 5, and that's it. Those are my numbers that multiply to negative 5. I need to now find which of these pairings also adds to positive 4. Use a calculator if you're not sure. 1 plus negative 5 is not positive 4. Negative 1 plus positive 5 is positive 4. So those are my two pairings. And here's how I write my answer. Two sets of parentheses. We have negative 1, positive 5. And then how do we get the x squared? X times x. That's step 2. And that is my final answer. So we factor the GCF first. And then in step 2, we leave the GCF and we factor the quadratic further. Let's try another example. Example 2, factor 6x squared minus 24. Same two steps as example 1. So step 1, factor the greatest common factor. So I see 6x squared minus 24. They both do not have an x, so that's not part of the greatest common factor. But 6 and negative 24 can both be divided by 6. So my greatest common factor is 6. I'm going to divide this term by 6 and this second term by 6. To write what's left in parentheses. So 6 goes outside the parentheses, and then 6x squared divided by 6 is just x squared. Negative 24 divided by 6 is negative 4. Step 1 is done. Factored the GCF. Step 2, factor further. So I leave the 6, just drag that down from step 1. And now I'm looking at this quadratic, x squared minus 4. I need two numbers that multiply to -4 and add up to, remember if there's no number there, they add up to 0. So let's write my list of numbers that multiply to -4. 1 times -4, -1, +4, that's -4. 2 times -2 is -4. And that is it. Now I have to find from my list of multiples of -4, which also adds up to 0. And it is definitely that third pairing, 2 and -2. So here's how we write our step 2 and final answer. 2 sets of parentheses. We have +2 and -2. And then where does the x squared go? X times x. So 6, x plus 2, x minus 2 is fully factored. Done. Last example. Example 3. Factor 10x squared minus 10x. Same 2 steps. Step 1. Factor the greatest common factor. I see an x in both terms, so I know that's part of my greatest common factor. And also 10. I can divide out a 10 from both. So in this example, I have 10x as my greatest common factor. When I divide both terms by that 10x, I'll write what's left over in parentheses. 10x squared divided by 10x. Start with the numbers. 10 divided by 10 is 1. X squared divided by x, there's an x left over. Right, you had 2 x's here, you divided one of them out, so there's an x left over. And then for the second term, -10 divided by 10 is -1, and x divided by x is nothing else. There's step 1. Step 2. Factor further. Now I'm looking at this. I would leave the 10x, and then x minus 1, that's not even a quadratic. So I cannot factor any further. That was my final answer. If you have any questions on factoring with GCF and then factoring further, let us know. Otherwise, have a great day.